Hi, I'm Len Epp from LeanPub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Charles Scalfani. Based in California, Charles is currently the CTO for Panoramic Software, where he and his team recently developed a system that helps U.S. military veterans file benefits claims, a process which can literally save lives. Charles has over 40 years of experience with software development and has worked on many cool projects over the years in a number of industries, which I'm looking forward to talking with him about a little bit. You can follow Charles on Twitter at @cscalfani and check out his Medium blog at cscalfani.medium.com. Charles is the author of the book, Functional Programming Made Easier, a Step-by-Step Guide. In this interview, we're going to talk about Charles's background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience writing and self-publishing. So thank you, Charles, for being on the Front Matter podcast.
Thank you.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you found yourself becoming interested in computers and software and technology.
Sure. I was a physics major. I wanted to be a theoretical physicist when I was 15, and I was in college, and I was standing outside my calculus class, and this guy came from down the hall. It's an area I didn't really know before. I'm like, what's down that way? And he said, oh, that's the computer lab. I go, oh, computer, yeah, I've heard of that. And he goes, you want to see? And I go, yeah, let's go look. And so he shows me a teletype, and he shows me a 3-line basic program. And it was so confusing. I walked out of there and I said, I will never understand computers. And the very next semester, my buddy of mine was taking a Fortran class. And he was really excited. And he said, oh, come. I go, computers, nah, I'm not interested. And he said, well, no, come with me. So I will go with him to the computer lab. But this time we walked past the teletypes and we walked into another room and had CRTs. And I'm like, whoa, what are those? And he said, well, those are the terminals. And I'm like, wow, it's like a TV, right? And he said, well, yeah. And so we sat down and I watched him program on that. And I was hooked at that point. I thought, this is just awesome, watching him type certain things and getting a program to work, because I'd been programming my calculator in high school, and I had the old TIs, those massive calculators back in the day, and we're talking the 70s, so they were huge, and I just watched people program for that whole semester and basically learned how to program watching other people do it. And people would look at me like I'm a crazy person, like, what are you even doing here? You don't even have a class. And I'm just interested. And I'd spent all my time in college doing that and decided that I didn't want to be a theoretical physicist anymore. I really wanted to learn programming. And I started programming and learning microprocessors, programming, back then it was 6502 8-bit microprocessors. And I got my first job at 19. I was professionally programming at 19.
Can I just pause you there for a second? So
yes.
you were self-taught.
Yes, completely.
And
yes.
How did you learn at that time?
All books. Everything was a book. There was no internet. There was not even, you couldn't even go to BBS, the old bulletin board systems. There was none of that. It was all books. I've always been a book person. Sit down, work through a book. The programming, the 6502 by Rodney Zacks was the book that I learned microprocessor programming from. And I just sat down with that book and I went through it page after page after page until I understood that page, and I went to the next page. So it was completely self-taught.
And do you remember what your interview was like? So I'm thinking, there you are, 19, you've studied physics, but you've now trained yourself up reading books on your own and auditing classes or something. And then do you remember what your interview was like?
Well, sort of. I remember how I dressed, and I think today, I would have never dressed like that for an interview. You're 19, and I had just gotten my retainer. So the whole drive to the interview, I'm like trying to sing with the radio and talk, because when you first get a retainer, because I got my breast off and I got a retainer, you can't talk. So I'm thinking, of all days I have an interview, I have a retainer. I don't remember what I talked about. It's one of those moments where you're so panicked that you forget everything. It's sort of like, something bad happens, it's all a blur. So I do not remember what I talked about, but they did ask me a bunch of, technical questions, but I don't remember it. That's 40 years ago.
And what was the company doing that you worked for?
They made, we made systems. They were it's an S100 bus system written in ZD assembly for like MIT and you name any large school, and they had their system in it. And it was for, I called it a meal control system. So you'd get these little cards with a magnetic strip on it, and your meal points would be kept on that. We stored our programs on a cassette tape. So they would boot the system off a cassette, and this massive what was called a card reader. It would have also a cassette, and it would boot the S100 bus system, which had the 8-inch floppies, and then they would just keep track of all of the card readers all over the campus, keeping track of the information in the in each individual accounts. We really didn't store it on hard drives and stuff. Yeah, it's a long time ago.
And was all this in California?
Yes, I grew up in California, and I've only been working in California.
Oh.
So that's sort of the beginnings of like how I started. It was, that job was sort of my university. I worked there for 2 years and really got to learn stuff. I remember my boss walks up to me and he throws a book on my desk and he says, "This is supposed to be the next new thing I want you to learn it." And I love learning. So I'm like, "Oh, great. This is awesome." It turns out that was Kernighan and Ritchie. C book, right? And there literally was no other book. And there was no real compiler to be had. We used a DECUS compiler, which is the DEC users group compiler on old PDP-11. And I learned that way. And I just went through the book, and it literally looked like hieroglyphics when I first opened it, because I had come from BASIC and Pascal and languages like that. So when I saw C, it was all these weird characters and things you never type on the keyboard. So for me, it was like, it was pretty scary, I remember. But I love those kinds of challenges, learning something.
And so you worked there for 2 years, and then you moved on to somewhere else, I imagine.
Yeah, I've over my 40 years, I've probably had about 18 jobs, going from different, lots of small companies. I'm more of a small company person. I like to where I can make a big difference in the company. I like where I can wear many hats and learn. You learn a lot more that way, and you can have a more positive impact on the business. But it's a very risky endeavor, and I've lost my job many times. Companies have gone under because they're tiny companies. The first real notable, I'm just going to tell you the interesting jobs I had. The first real notable job was I worked on the firmware for an audio card before PCs had audio cards, and basically I debugged my code with a dual trace oscilloscope, because I had nothing else. There was no tools. I was burning all of my code into this ROM, into EROM, or EEROM, and I'd put the card together. I'd put the oscilloscope, and my program got to a certain point. It would just output to a port and sit in a loop, and I could see the signal on the oscilloscope, knowing, oh, my program got here. And we were going to sell this card to Sony Interactive at the time. We were going to show it to them. And so we made this little demo where we took an album and we put some cuts on there, and we were going to play them on using this new audio card. And we had touchscreen technology back then. I mean, this is like 1984 maybe. And as I'm demoing it for the company, this demo that we put together for them, demonstrating the card and everything, I realized, wait a minute, we should take this thing to Tower Records, and this would be a great thing for people to listen to albums before they buy it. So long story short, by 1985, 86, we had a bunch of record companies putting music on our system. It's called the Music Sampler, and it was in 20 or more Tower Record stores all over the country. I'd figured out how to take a laser disc player that could play music videos, and I did a little bit of hardware hacking, and got it so that we could meld digital. This is like I said, 86, digital and video on the same screen, so that we could have music videos. And we're talking to MTV. And then in October of 87, the stock market crashed, and that was the end of the company. It just decimated our company.
Oh my, that's really interesting that's how that went under, because I mean, that just the technology you're describing, for those listening who might not be old enough to remember, like that would have been a magical thing to walk into a record store and to be able to use the touchscreen thing, but B, choose from a variety of, songs and especially videos to watch and get a sample from, because in those days, like, well, specifically if you wanted to watch a music video, you basically had to wait for it to come on MTV.
Yep. Yep.
And
Exactly right.
it was up to them what you got to watch, and and also the idea of being able to sample music, right? If you didn't hear it on the radio or at a friend's place,
Yep.
you walk into a record store, everything's sealed up in its box basically, and you can't take them out and listen to them. That's just not the way things work. So that would have been a really amazing technology, and I'm sorry to hear that it was
Oh, so disappointed.
external
So
accident that
disappointed.
brought the whole
Yeah.
thing down.
It was sad too, because we had heard from RCA Records that we had given them so we used to collect statistics. So at the end, when you heard a song, we had a little happy face, a frowny face, and sort of a don't care face, and then you could touch the screen to say what you thought about the music. And they told us that DJ and Jazzy Jeff, I don't remember if you remember those guys, right? DJ and Jazzy Jeff, we were able to tell them that was going to be a hit record a month before all of their other information systems could tell them, because we were right there and we were collecting the data from people who were listening to it in the stores. So they didn't have to wait for their purchasing data to come through. So yeah, it was very, very disappointing. I'm like, and so like a year later, I called one of the guys I used to work with. I'm like, what happened? We were supposed to be millionaires, So I've had many times of like those disappointing times. Fast forward to working in Hollywood. That was a lot of fun. I spent about, I don't know, 10 years working in animation and in that area. I worked for Metrolight Studios, which was they won an Academy Award and an Emmy for their work in 3D animation. And I programmed the Annie system, which was one of the very early digital ink and paint systems for animation. And then that was sold to a CD-ROM company, because that was during the time of CD-ROM games. And then we went off, and a bunch of people who worked there went off and started our own company, Classics Entertainment.
Yeah, just if I could pause you there for a second. So this Annie project was very interesting, and I think it was used for Ren and Stimpy and things like that. And could you talk a little bit about what a digital ink and paint system is?
Oh yeah, sure. I apologize.
No, that's fine.
Fast do that. Okay, so basically you get paper, right, that the animator has drawn on, and you put it onto a slightly modified scanner. And what we would do is if you've ever seen an animator work or an animation table, it's a backlit piece of glass, and they have this pegboard, and it has a slot on both ends for holes, and a round slot in the middle. So the paper fits over these pegs and they draw, right? And that's how they can register it. So each drawing is registered because of these peg holes. So the next piece of paper you put on is registered that way. Well, we had to scan it and also register those. So we modified our scanners, and we had people who did scanning. And then once it was in the computer, then digital ink and paint, like the old days, they'd paint on the back of cells. This was, you basically did a flood fill paint. So you just took the color with we had, back in those days, we had tablets, and nobody was using tablets. We even used Wacom tablets, which are now the industry standard, but back then we used every type. And you just touch with your pen on the color, and then you would touch on the area and it would flood fill that color. And so we could do that pretty quickly. And then once that was done, we had scanned in the backgrounds. This is back when Photoshop was like version 3 or 4. It's pretty old, but we used Photoshop, and we would piece because we had the scanner to just do the backgrounds was $16,000, and today we could get it for a few $100, but back then everything was super expensive. And we would scan the backgrounds and we'd piece them together because they were long sometimes. So if you ever watch cartoon and you watch a character walk across the screen, you're going to see that they're going to walk quite a ways, and then it'll start repeating itself, like the Flintstones did that. And but we had to scan that and in pieces because the scanner wasn't big enough. I think it was 16 inches only. And because they're used to just having this big crank, and they could just crank this massive background under the camera in the old days. So we had to piece that stuff together. So we had to digitally piece in there, and then just all the software had to do just the camera movements and things. And this was in the day where technology was so bad that we bought cards from AT&T TrueVision, and they were $15,000 for these graphics cards, $15,000 per workstation. And it got to the point, this is when we had 286s and 386s, okay, for PCs. Then it got to the point, I think when the 386 or the 46 came out, that those cards were too slow, and we started doing more on the PC and less on the graphics card. So this is and we'd watch like a screen render, a single frame render in front of your eyes. It would you could count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, as it just painted down the screen as we're rendering it. So the technology was just in its absolute infancy. I mean, what we can do today is literally magic.
Can you give us a year when this was going on, just so things changed so fast, actually, knowing when it was?
Yes, that was 90, I don't remember. It was right before the LA riots, so it was
94. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it was before that. So we were doing, we were doing stuff about that time, and the technology wasn't like it is today, where it just leaps and bounds over that. But yeah, so everything was complicated and slow and expensive, but we were doing it.
And 93, that would have been right around the sort of popularity or popularization of the World Wide Web, right?
No, I mean, let me think, where was I? Yeah, it was after that when we spun off Classics Entertainment to do pretty much the same thing. We spun off Classics Entertainment, and it was about then where the internet was becoming more popular. And I'm like, I always pride myself in being very good about telling what the new technologies are going to be. And I just missed it completely on the internet. I'm like, internet, what is that? That's crazy. I'm like, I don't need that. I got CompuServe or whatever I was using at the time. And yeah, so that was after probably we were just getting there at that point. And then we did Ren and Stimpy, and we did work for Disney. We did work for Universal Studios, Shelley Duvall's Bedtime Stories. I think that was Universal. I can't remember. Like I said, it's been too long. We did some Beavis and Butthead episodes, and there were other companies in town that were doing similar work, and then there was Disney, right? And they had their CAP system. I'm sure they don't have that anymore, but at the time there weren't that many systems that could do digital ink and paint. So another time I felt pretty lucky to be on that cutting edge, and so that was exciting.
Yeah, and so you said you struck out on your own and you started your own company, and you've had ups and downs and things like that.
Yeah, we went under.
Yeah, and so you ended up. I mean, we'll leap ahead just in the interest of time, but
sure.
You ended up where you are now as CTO for Panoramic Software, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what kind of work you guys do. I mentioned a recent product that you mentioned in your LeanPub bio.
Yes.
When I was doing the introduction, and if you could maybe talk a little bit about that work, because things with the technology and the Veterans Affairs Office and something like that is actually a kind of part of popular understanding, because it's often, or not so much recently, but there was a time when it was actually quite common to be in the news where like people can't process forms and stuff like that. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the work you've done within that context.
Yeah, sure. That's probably the one thing that I'm like very proud of the work. It's as glamorous as my early work, where you're doing music and you're doing animation and commercials and stuff like that. That's sparkly and glamorous and stuff. And I got over that at some point. I realized that that's fun, and those are things that I could turn into hobbies, but it's really a difficult business to be in. So I kind of got into business stuff, doing business stuff. And I mean, honestly, for me, the technology doesn't matter. I mean, the product doesn't matter so much as the technology and how you do it, right? But this was something that I never realized. I'm doing this work and stuff, and it really took someone who worked with veterans, who wound up working with us, to really open my eyes to how she used our old legacy system, which I wasn't involved in, but and she's actually felt that there are times she's actually gotten vets off the streets and saved their lives. So that really hit me, and it changed my whole perspective on what we were doing. Before it was just a technology thing, but to have that added, knowledge that you're helping people make a huge difference in people's lives. And it's always, I mean, I grew up during Vietnam, and so I mean, it's always bothered me. The movie Coming Home and all that really had an impact of like how we didn't treat our soldiers right, and we haven't really treated our vets well, honestly. Doesn't mean that people don't care about them. It doesn't mean that there aren't people like there. I work with people in the VA, and they care. They really do, and they're working hard, and they're making really big improvements. But it's just so slow and so much bureaucracy and everything. It just takes time. But so yeah, we just recently built all in functional programming. We built a system that uses Haskell on the back end and Elm on the front end, and as just came out 2 years ago, I guess. And we're slowly installing it in different places in the country. And when the pandemic hit, that was another thing. When the pandemic hit, I was frustrated because I couldn't do anything about it, right? I'm a problem solver. And so for me, I thought, well, what can I do? And I realized I know what I can do. I can make it so people can do remote signatures of their forms. So we had a thing called Finger Ink. It's a website. You go to finger.ink and we use that. And so typically someone might be in an office with their representative who's helping them fill out their forms to get their claims. And they would just say, okay, go onto your phone, go to finger.ink and type in this 6-digit code. And then they turn their phone and they would sign with their finger, and then it would pop up on the screen and they've just signed their document. So I created a system so that they could get an email and from their representative who was remote from them, and they could click on the link and they could go on there and log on with their social security number, see their document, right, and be able to sign it right there. And that this way they wouldn't have to come in to the office for social distancing reasons, especially since a lot of them are older. And so that was a big exciting thing for me. That was my thing. Like, okay, this is what I can do to help. I just felt like I wanted to do something, and even though it's my little corner of the world, I was happy to do it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. The adoption of technologies that reduce the number of trips that people have to take to do things, and the bureaucratic acceptance of them has actually been like a really big, in my view, like kind of positive result of the pandemic.
Yes.
I've got a friend who's a surgeon, and he talked about how like at the beginning they were like in his hospitals, they were like, well, we've actually really got to rethink whether people really do need to come in for personal in-person visits as much as we've been doing routinely so far. And he was part of the revolution. I mean, I'm sure you read some articles about this too, about how like in 1 month there was 10 years of progress on the use of remote technology.
Yes.
Whether it's looking at you cut someone's head open last week and now you want to have them lift up the bandage gingerly and have a look underneath. Well, instead of making them take a day off work, maybe have to take the kids with them into town, drive 3 hours and make an in-person visit where they might have to wait for some arbitrary amount of time and then see someone for 5 minutes. If you can actually, like things like you mentioned, like just going to an office to do a signature or something, like for some people that can actually be a huge burden. And to take that away can be really, really good advancement.
Well, I thought someone could be in a hospital bed and you could hand them an iPad and they could go to the site, see their documentation and sign it because it might be important and they can't get there. And one of the things that's really important for veterans is that they get their claim date. It's called their claim date because they can lose thousands of dollars if they don't get that. So it's really critical to get that date. And so that may require a signature.
Well, and those claim dates can be more complicated matters than some people think. You reminded me of a podcast I was listening to where he was handling post 9/11 claims for first responders and things like that. And there was the spouse of a first responder who I believe had died shortly after 9/11 was sort of insisting on moving up the date at which she could do something in order to get the settlement. And from a sort of surface perspective, it looked really selfish, right? She just wanted the money sooner. But when he met with her, it turned out she was dying. And she had a date, like she wasn't going to be around at the end of the month. And so she really needed to get it sooner. And these kinds of things can, life gets in the way of red tape, and anything you can do to make it better is good. Actually, you gave me a good opportunity to segue into the next segment of the interview. And it's actually one I neglected to mention to you before, because I only started it a year and a bit ago. But in
Okay.
March 2020, I started asking people, how's the pandemic affected you personally and professionally? And while we're coming out of it, we are still kind of in it. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how it affected you in your neck of the woods and your job.
Yeah, it's a great question. The I used to always say, and this is many years ago, if programmers can't remote work, no one can. And I was really surprised how many people could. My wife's been working home. She works in an office. She works in your typical office work. I'm not going to go into the details of it because that's private and all for her. And I would never guess that she could operate remotely like that. And we're actually, as a bunch of programmers, getting back into our office sooner than she is. She won't go back till September. So I'm really happy that people realize that, because I was always an advocate for remote work. And with programming, I say it's like a dream when you're working. You're in a dream, you're having a dream, and if somebody just interrupts you in any way, shape, or form, it's like being woken up out of a sound sleep and you were dreaming, and they ask you some trivial question, and it's like, okay, it's like, oh, I was in the middle of a dream. Oh, sorry, go back to sleep and finish your dream. That can never happen. You can never get back into that dream. You'll never. And so having that the ability to work remotely and have that time where you can just ignore everybody, they can't just walk into your office or by your cube. That's really great. And so for me, looking at at how the world is finally catching up, I'm always pushing technology. I'm always pushing. I'm always looking for the next thing, and I'm a little bit more reserved than I was when I was younger. When you're younger, you think, oh, this is the next big thing. Everything's great and everything's exciting and everything, and you just don't have enough experience to be able to judge it whether it is truly a big thing or not. And as I've gotten older, it's easier and easier to be able to look at a new thing and see how it might fit in the world. And being able to work remotely has always been something that I thought was a great thing, and I'm really glad that more people see that they can do these things. I watched like the Zooms and we're doing this over Zoom. That technology it's just ubiquitous now. My wife wouldn't use Zoom. It'd be, oh no, it's typically people my age, right? It's old people always going, oh, I'm too old and I can't do this. But then when we had to do it, they were able to do it, and that is probably one of, like, from a professional and technical viewpoint, that was probably one of the good things that came out of the pandemic, I think. And I hope that we retain that and move forward with that. For me, and maybe this is still a naive position, but I believe people can do so much more than they do many times. I believe just because you're old doesn't mean you can't learn. And so to see people who would normally not use that technology use it, and on an everyday basis, so that they don't even think about it. I hope they realize that look, you did it. You can do this stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. That's something I could talk about forever. Partly it comes from your first experience of technology. So, for example, I'm just thinking about my dad, like, who'd totally get in a car and like drive somewhere he's never been before, which is, when you think about it, a crazy thing to do. Like, it's so complicated. There's people coming at you from all directions. You might be going faster than humans ever moved before, and you just get in and do it. But if you ask him to like use the computer, he's like, nuh-uh. And he does more now. But one of the reasons was, like, his first experience with a computer was with a very clunky, hard to use thing where you had to read a manual and maybe take a course. And it was at the time when you could lose work if you didn't save, or if the power went out. Maybe at the time, I think he might have been before like Control Z. So there's no undoing mistakes and stuff like that. And so, and also at the time when computers were really expensive and did break, the green screen of death or something like that. And I mean, my generational version of it that I like to talk about is, like, when I play computer games, I still have the mentality of that 5-year-old kid who was given 2 quarters and like
Mm.
when you die, you're dead. Like there's no more
Right.
video game for you. So I
Right. Game
play,
really over.
yeah. So I play everything like it's the true death, right? And like
Yes.
I find it really hard to get into the mindset of no, 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 you just died. Just try something else now. And yeah, that's
That's so funny you say that because I found myself when I first, because I had played games way back, the put a quarter in, and then I didn't do it for 20 years, and then I was playing games again, and it was exactly that same problem. I played like it was really life and death because I didn't want to die, and I watched like my daughter play, and I watched other kids play who just grew up on, they just die, no big deal. And like they just like running and gunning into completely crazy situations. They're like, no one would ever do that in the real world. Like, what are you doing? This is so wrong. And they wouldn't die like I thought they would die. And I'm like, oh, I see how this works. And so now there are times when I'm in a game and I'm like, all right, I'm going into this room and I'm going to die. But I want to go look around. I'm just going to stand in the middle of the room while they're all just killing me. And I'm just going to look around so I know who's where. And the next time I come back, I'll know where everybody is and I'll take them out. And I would do stuff like that. And yeah, it's exactly that. And to take that to computers, when I teach people, I'm like, you can't break this. Don't worry. There's nothing you can do to break this. In fact, if you think that'll break it, do it. Just do it. I promise you won't break it. I've helped so many people get somewhat over that fear of they don't know what to do. Like they were, my neighbors a long time ago, they were afraid of the mouse. And I kept telling them, get off DOS. You got to get onto Windows. They were doing tax preparation. I'm like, you got to get out of this old technology. And so I just sat with them and said, pointed on the screen. I said, move your mouse to my finger. Okay, over here now, over here. And just start very slowly and work them up until they get the confidence. And it's a matter of knowing how to teach and knowing how to learn and knowing what the stumbling blocks are going to be for them so that you can get them over those kinds of hurdles.
I was going to say, yeah, we'll get to your approach to teaching pretty, which you just gave us a taste of when we get to talking about your book a little bit more. But yeah, no, I wanted to say, yeah, I mean, it's one thing. For example, when I was a kid, I thought old people wear hats, right? I didn't
Yep.
realize it's because they wore hats when they were young, right? It's
Exactly.
not that when you become old, you're going to start wearing a brimmed hat. And a lot of people make that mistake about themselves too, right? They might think, oh, I'm bad at computers because I'm old. And it's like, maybe you're bad at computers because computers were bad when you first encountered them.
Yeah.
And you're carrying that with you. And the kids
Right.
these days are working with things that work and are easy. And
Yes.
maybe that's the reason they seem less fearful than you, is that they just see it as a toaster rather than a starship or something like
That's a double-edged sword, by the way.
that.
So I used to call my daughter the point and click generation, right? And when I sat her down to teach her programming, she's a programmer now, and she's been working in the industry for about 3 to 5 years now. But when I first sat her down, she wasn't just like first year of college. I said to her, look, you think this box is magic. It's not magic. It's the dumbest thing you'll ever meet. And she's like, she didn't understand. And I said, here's what I want to do. I'm going to crack this I had an old PC. I cracked it open and I told her to physically touch the computer, different areas of the computer. I wanted her to have a visceral experience base of what I meant when I said the CPU. Remember that little square thing you touched? Yeah, that's the CPU. Inside there, all the logic happens. And she was into logic, so she got that. And then follow this ribbon cable to the hard drive and see these slots, these circuit boards that are in these slots. That's your memory. And I explained to her like all of those things, and I said, you're gonna like. It was easy for me because I started when there was nothing, you know, nothing did anything, and so I got to grow up with it. When you come into the industry now, it's very difficult because it's massive. The industry is there's so much that's been done. So I said to her, I said, and you come in with the wrong mindset. You're coming into this industry with the like I said, the point and click generation is point. I remember when she was in first grade, we're sitting at dinner and she goes, Dad, we have these computers in our classroom. And I'm like, uh-huh. She goes, they don't have a mouse. And I go, oh yeah. And she goes, how do you click? And I just started laughing. It's like, that was she grew up with it. And like you said, toaster, I actually use that example all the time. To my daughter, it's like a toaster. It was always in the universe. To me, it wasn't. It just came into the universe. And for people like that, where things come into their universe and it wasn't something around all the time, it can be scary. and it's no reason. There's absolutely no reason if you have the right mindset and you have the help. And so yeah, trying to teach her that and try to undo that thinking. She got to a point where she's like, well, can't I just tell it to do this? No, you have to do that. Well, can't I just do that? No, you have to do that. She's like, oh my God, this thing's the dumbest thing on the planet. I go, exactly. Now you understand. I go, this thing is dumb. It's just very fast at doing very dumb things. You, very smart people have worked thousands of man years, so built on top of stuff such that you can just click a mouse and have magic happen, watch a movie on your computer. All of that has happened over thousands of man years of technology and work. And it's a lot of smart people working very hard to make that possible. But the machine hasn't really gotten smarter.
Just before we move on to talking about your book, I've got one last thing I'd like to ask you about, and this has to do with writing. So you wrote a movie.
Yeah, that was a hobby.
Called Solitary, that's actually currently streaming on Amazon Prime Video. And I was just wondering, for those interested in, like, how does one get script made into a movie, if you could briefly, I guess, I mean, I'm sure it's a very long story, but tell us a little bit about that.
I will. I'll keep it short. So remember I said I got out of Hollywood and that I said I could have those as hobbies. I reached a good equilibrium there with my career and my hobbies, where I I didn't want to. I knew I was going to get paid to do these things, and I wasn't paid enough, and it was long hours. It was, you talk to anybody who's worked in the gaming industry, it was the same thing in my industry where we worked in animation and such and technology. So I thought, I'm just going to make this a hobby, and I spent probably most of my 40s hobby time excuse me, doing screenplays, writing screenplays, learning about filmmaking. I shot a short film with a friend of mine. I was a cinematographer on that. Learning about lighting, I took acting classes at the I forget what it's called. It's in Orange County, Performing Arts in Orange County. I took acting classes. I read about directing. I read about editing. I pretty much just delved completely into that. I wrote 10 different screenplays, put them in different contests and such. And then I'm working on a screenplay one night, and my friend that I met through my work in Hollywood, he said, I want to direct a film. And he had taken an idea of mine, a story of idea of mine, and done a short many years ago. And I go, okay. He goes, I want to shoot it in my house, but I need an idea. And then, so we just brainstormed together, and in 2 hours, we had a complete story of what we wanted it to be. And, that's the easy part, by the way. He goes, so do you want to work on it with me? And I said, absolutely, because I was excited, right? So we worked on that thing for I don't know how many years. We had version A, version B, version C. We went through the whole alphabet and started AA and AB and AC, and I don't know where we wound up. We had so many revisions of it. My brother was into he'd done like radio. He used to work on the radio, and he was a DJ in clubs, and he was in talent management. So he was helping us market it to different production companies. There was a lot of production companies in town who wanted to buy the script, but my buddy wanted to be, he was attached as the director, and they didn't want him as director because he hadn't done it. Well, that was the whole point of the exercise, is to help him direct something. And we wrote it around his house, which you could, if you got enough money, you could always like make that house in the set, or even shoot on location. But so we decided, okay, no, we said no to everyone. And then I went off and I shot the film with my another friend of mine who I also met in Hollywood. He's a composer, and we shot his film. And my other buddy came to see our film, right? So we had a little thing where you invited a bunch of friends to watch the film. It was a 20-minute film. He had made his 20-minute film many years ago for, I don't remember how much, it was tens of thousands of dollars, I think. And we had made this thing for thousands of dollars, right? It's not much at all, not counting the equipment we bought. And so that pushed him over the edge to say, okay, I'm making this film. And so we shot it on the Red camera. This is the days when the Red camera just came out. So it's in 4K. And now he got the rights back because it was international. It was made in, it was dubbed into many different languages. And and it was on TV a few times, and it won a few awards on a film festival. So he took that 4K and he just remastered it, and I believe that's what you can watch on Amazon Prime. Yeah, that was an amazing experience, and I wish I could do more of that, but it's 10 years to get to that point, and it's really hard. And so I did it, and it's one of those things that I if I had a chance to do it again, I would do it in a heartbeat. I absolutely love I love that process.
Yeah, thanks very much for that really great story. It's really interesting for anyone who's thinking about doing it. There's no when it comes to starting a project, there are no gatekeepers. I think people often think you need kind of like permission or approval, or there's only some kind of nominated set of people that get to write screenplays and try and make movies. And it's like, no, you can do it. You might want to read some screenplays before trying it, and,
Yeah.
read some how to write screenplay books and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And there's lots of guidance out there that's actually really good. But there's if you're interested in doing it, there's nothing stopping you. And I mean, I've not had the sort of experience you had, but I've written a couple myself, and like I can say, it is extremely exciting and fun
Yes.
when you find yourself going down a coherent path for a story, and then you realize you're the one that's creating it, and you get to do whatever you want next. And that's just kind of an intoxicating experience.
I love what you said about permission, because I remember saying exactly that. I kept telling my friends, like, you know what? I'm tired of asking permission. I don't want to ask anybody permission. Like, oh, can I do this? Or, go to a production place. Oh, can we make this? And I think that's part of like, I'm now into my new hobby is music. So I figure in my 60s, I'm going to do music. And I'm trying to learn how to compose music. And I just don't want to ask anybody's permission. I want to do what I want to do, and I shouldn't have to. And we should be able to make this film, and we did.
Yeah, not to digress too much, but then, and the other thing you'll encounter when you do something like that is people going, "Who do you think you are?" It's kind of
Yeah, and
yeah.
I turn that around to, no, you don't understand. I'm not special. Everyone can do this. The only difference is I was lucky enough to be born thinking that compared to everybody else, and that really gets down to the book, right? And it's about, look, you can do this. But it's a lot of work, but I can make it easier for you because I've already been through it, and there's no reason we should both go through the pain.
Yeah, so that's again, you're offering me the perfect opportunity for a segue. So I wanted to talk. My next question was going to be about your book, "Functional Programming Made Easier: A Step-by-Step Guide," and it really is, by the way, a step-by-step guide, which is something we'll talk about in a bit. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your inspiration was to write the book and who it's for.
Okay. Let's see. Inspiration. I did not want to write this book. I'll be honest. In fact, I joked that, and I might still do this. Right, I was going to write an article called "The Programming Book I Wish I Never Wrote," and I didn't want to write this book. I wanted to read this book. That was the thing. Because I struggled so many times to learn functional programming. I tried to learn Haskell, which is like the granddaddy of all languages. I program in it now, but I failed miserably 4 times, and it was like beating my head against the wall. And I just kept, oh well, it's too hard, or well, and I sour grape it away. But I was very attracted to it because I saw some of the power in it. And the more I tried to use like JavaScript to do functional things, the more I realized this language, yes, I can do functional things in it, but boy, it is so not made for this. And I thought, I should get back into Haskell and try to learn that again. And then I learned Elm, which is a very, very beginner and a very easy functional language. And we built, like I said, it's a product called VetPro that does the claim, allows people to fill out claims. We wrote about 160,000 lines of code in Elm, but we got to a point where Elm it wouldn't scale for us. The language didn't scale for us. And so that's when I realized that I'm going to have to just bite the bullet. I spent 3 months doing nothing day and night, and even at work, weekends, trying to learn Haskell. I bought all kinds of books. I read tons of blog posts. And here's the problem. When you don't know, and it's because I grew up in this industry, I I don't understand what it's like to arrive in this industry, like new programmers. What is that like? I got a taste of it, just a taste of what that's like to not know. I'm like, gee, I've been doing this 36, 35 years at the time. And here I can't learn a language. What is wrong with me? So I would blame the language, or I'd blame the people. And to some degree, the people explaining it have a huge burden, right? If you tell me you understand this and you're going to explain it to me, then the burden's on you to do that job and explain. So I put a huge burden on myself to explain it well in the book. So I understand when you come into you don't know where to read. You're in what they call tutorial hell. A lot of the new people trying to learn programming today, because I kind of keep my ear to the ground on what people are talking about trying to learn programming, and I know exactly what they're talking about. Like I would find that at the end of the day, I'd have 20 tabs open, right, in my browser, and I was down a rabbit hole. The best way I could explain it is you're going to learn German by only reading a German dictionary. Okay, good luck. That's what it felt like. So you would read something and you find a word you don't know, and you have to look that word up, and it used a bunch of words you didn't know, and you have to look each of those words up, and it was just a complete rabbit hole every day. It was painful and miserable. And then I finally somehow came out the other side, and it's a great technology. It's an amazing. I've been doing this long enough to know when something's great. It was way ahead of its time because functional programming was long before imperative programming, even before my time, and but it was way ahead of its time. And now it's the time. Now is the time. You can see functional programming being used in every, being adopted, little pieces being adopted by lots of different languages. So I didn't want to write this book, but I felt the world needed this book, and if I didn't write it, it would never have it. That was my feeling, and I got to that point, and I thought I have to write it. I don't have a choice at this point. And it was 2 years, and it was hard, and I was ready to come out with the book, and then the PureScript compiler changed from version 13 to 14 and broke all kinds of stuff in the book, and I had to go back through the whole book, work through every one of the things, and make changes to the book, thousands of edits before I could release it. So I was like super close to releasing it earlier in the year. And because I really don't want to leave anybody out in the cold at all. So anyway, that's what got me.
I'd like to drill into that a little bit, because I mean, when you say thousands of edits in 2 years, for those listening, the book is 1,900 pages long or so in the PDF, and it is very long, but there's actually a very straightforward reason for that has to do with your approach to teaching, which is that you actually show the coding of the product line by line, and you explain every decision. And I really like that. And like you actually wrote, I'm going to be mixing up your book a little bit with the recent Medium post you wrote called How to Write a Programming Book.
Oh yeah, cool.
But like I can't tell you how much I agreed with everything I was reading that you were saying about the common mistakes that people make. And I think I also share your sense of natural irritation when people do this kind of thing. And it's like, I mean, so one example I use is not books, but Stack Overflow is a wonderful thing, right? But the first answer to any question on Stack Overflow is, why would you want to do that in the first place? And I don't know what garden those assholes are grown in and how they're always the first one to respond. But like, dude, guy's not asking he's just asking a question.
Yes, help him out here.
And the second, and my joke is the second person who answers will go, "Oh, you just screef the new bar." And then
and now you don't know it exactly.
And then you have a line, and I think it was in your post where you say, "This is the equivalent of you asking me what a nap is," and I explain that it's a moople that comes in 3 colors, red, green, and blue, and that it humbats with its mouth except for the green ones. And it's like it's a much better example, much more elaborate and better explained example than mine. But like, because you're talking about introducing children to the idea of what a dog is,
right?
But the idea that you have of having to go step by step and empathizing with people who are new to something that you're familiar with, and actually how, like, it's easy to make fun, but actually how really hard it is to get into the mindset of someone who's new, and also how just hard it is to really stick to doing something step by step. I interviewed someone recently named Eric Mathis, who wrote a very popular book. I think it's the best-selling Python programming book. Okay. And it took him a very long time, but it was the same. It strikes me as he had the same attitude as you had towards it, that like, you can't skip a step. And that's easier said than done.
Boy, you're 100% right. I remember as I'm getting towards the latter part of the book, because the first half of the book, the first 900 pages, give or take, is like the not theory but the concepts. Okay, and the second 900 pages is just getting down to doing real things with the language and seeing how they work in real situations. And when I was in that second half of the book, and so many times I wanted to skip, right? Because I'm fatigued, and I just didn't let myself off the hook. I'm like, nope, nope. This book, I want this book to be no skipping the whole way through, the whole way through. Now, what I did do, because the functions get larger, is I would redact code above a certain point because we're not working on that part, in so that I just didn't bloat the book even more. But my thinking is this is how I write code, right? I sit and I think about it. I think, what am I going to do? And I think I make my strategy, and then I start coding, and I write one line. So where do I start? I write this line first. And then what do I do next? I think for a second. And then what do I do next? I write the next line, maybe half a line, right? Or maybe I start writing a line and I realize, wait, hold on. I don't know what I'm doing here. Or, oh, I got to look something up. I basically tried to simulate that process throughout the complete book. What is it like? I left mistakes, right? I would code something for the book because I sit and I code it first and then I work through it. And I'd make a mistake and I'm like, oh, no, that's good. I'm leaving that in, because that's the way real life is. What I never like is in all books is all you're reading a book and all of a sudden it's like, all right, and this is how you do it. Boom, this perfectly formed answer, this massively complicated function, and it's like magic. And you think this guy's a genius and I'm an idiot because look, he wrote this and I can't understand any of it. However, he didn't just write it whole cloth, right? He went exactly the way I'm doing it. And, he thought about it. He wrote a line. He made a lot of mistakes. He had a lot of compiler errors. He fixed all those things. And then he gives you the end product in there. And that's the problem with, in my opinion, with a ton of books. You don't get to see all the mistakes that everybody made. You don't get to see the blind alleys and it's that whole thing about you, how you judge yourself against the world, right? They say, well, you're seeing their highlight reel, but then you're seeing behind the scenes in your life, right? That's the thing. I give you the behind the scenes. I show you all the mistakes I make, bad decisions I made as I'm writing the book. I didn't pre-guess anything. I'm just like, oh, I'm just going to do this thing. And if I made a bad decision, I'm like, uh-oh, this is a problem. And I'll ask the reader, can you see my mistake? Because it is my mistake. I'm the teacher here. It's my mistake that I made. And then we fix it together because this is a mistake that I made. Now, some of those I put in on purpose, but mostly no. A lot of these were, just little mistakes you make along the way. You literally get to look at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of compiler errors. I snapshotted all, most of them. Towards the end, I did less and less of that because at that point, you got it. It's just, you've seen this one a million times already. So, but that's what it's like. And so I'm like, how can I simulate if I sat down with you and we coded together, we pair programmed, and I asked you questions like, okay, what are we going to do now? Or what are you thinking? What would your approach be? All of those things. How can I simulate that in a book? And that's why there are so many pages. Also, going back to my screenwriting, people who read your screenplays when you're trying to sell them, they don't want to read a lot. I mean, if you remember Martin Short in The Player, he's like, he points to like a pile of scripts on his desk. He says, see these screenplays? I've read almost all of them, almost all the way through, right? And that's a huge joke in the industry because nobody wants to read your stuff. So if you have description, not dialogue, if you have description and that description is important, you better not make that description too much like of what I call it, like a paragraph that looks like you're eating a brick to read, right? You better not have that, otherwise they'll skip right over it. And they'll miss a bunch of stuff that happens in the story because they're just jumping to the dialogue. And that happens with readers all the time. So what I did is I was very careful about putting very, very little, and then I'd have a paragraph break. And it's almost crazy. Sometimes just one sentence, paragraph break, one sentence, paragraph break. I did the same thing in the book. Because the problem with technical material is you need time to breathe, but we were taught in school to read the paragraph and then think, right? And we tend to do that. So I give you time to take little baby bites and then chew. and then another baby bite, and then chew. So there's a lot of white space in the book in that way, and I always find it easier to absorb stuff when people do that.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't really think that sort of writing movies and writing programming books and even programming would sort of be so nicely enmeshed in our conversation. But I'm really enjoying it. You're reminding me of something called the log line that you're supposed to come up
Yes,
with when you make a movie, which is like
yes,
literally one sentence. It shouldn't be too
yes.
many words. It's kind of like if Steven Spielberg were standing in front of you and you had like 10 words to catch his attention, what would you say? And I think there's actually like a huge running joke about that in The Player, which I haven't seen in a long
Yes,
time.
yeah,
But
there is.
it's kind of like Die Hard, but on a boat, or one I wrote.
That's the pitch. That's the pitch, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
one I wrote a long time ago was it's Deadwood after the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, cool.
Things like that when you want but the thing is it's funny, but the thing is like the short punchy thing can actually take you a really long time to get, and again it's one of those things where you can get impatient, right? Like, but actually
Hmm.
putting in the detail, doing the revisions, things like that. And you're actually reminding me of a movie example that I've used before, a movie lore example that I've used before on the podcast to explain exactly what I dislike about poorly explained things. And it's
Hmm.
the old well, Quentin Tarantino was just working at a movie rental store, if for anyone who remembers what those were. And then he was a
Yep.
famous director. And I was like, I
Right.
was always very frustrated by that type of
Yeah.
explanation. And then I once came across an interview with Quentin Tarantino where he's like, no, here's what happened. And I'll get it wrong a little bit, but he goes, no, my friend at the video store, his girlfriend worked out with Harvey Keitel's girlfriend at the time. So I
Mm.
gave the screenplay for Reservoir Dogs to my friend who gave it to his girlfriend, who took it to the gym, who gave
Right.
it to her friend, and who gave it to Harvey Keitel. And then one day I'm getting it wrong, but it was kind of like actually understanding that chain is so important for really getting done what you want to do. And I just can't exaggerate enough how important it is that any little gap in that story, and it would be
Right.
impossible to replicate what had actually
Yeah.
happened. And with programming, as you say, computers are actually quite dumb. You get one thing wrong, you miss one thing in your book, and you get it out there, and everybody who gets to that point is like stuck and has to throw away the book if you don't get it right. Kind of.
Yeah, and that was one thing that I joke about Martin Short's line in The Player. Um, I I I could point to a whole slew of books that I've read almost all the way through, because I either get to the point where I'm like, okay, this isn't working, right? I'm not. This book isn't working for me, or I get it. You don't have to keep beating a dead horse. So there is a balance. There's a balance there. I worked with a guy for 20 years. We moved from company to company. I always dragged him along, and uh, we had two different ways of looking at a book. Right? We would buy the same books. We were both book people, and we would buy the books, and we would try to learn from them. And if he couldn't learn from the book, he would blame himself. He goes, "Well, I'm just too stupid to understand this." And when I read the book and couldn't understand it, I thought that the author did. I blamed the author. I didn't blame me. I thought the author blew it, right? The author didn't do their job. And I'm really hard on authors because of that. And I was hard on myself, and I still am. I held myself to a very high standard of, look, you're saying to the world, hey world, I know this information and I can explain it to you so that you can also know it. Okay. Right. Well, it's your job as the author to then make sure that you do that job, right? The person has to meet you halfway, obviously, but they wouldn't be wasting their time reading the words you put on paper if they didn't want the information, right? So it's the burden is really on me, the teacher or the author of a book, to make sure that I've done absolutely everything I possibly can so that you can learn what I'm trying to say. That's why I did the white space. That's why I go into like there's a lot of math notation that you'll come up against. Not a lot in the book, but there's some. And you in programming, and so you might bump into it, and then it just seems like, remember I talked about hieroglyphics in C when I first saw C? Well, it appears to be hieroglyphics when you look at math in many ways. And my daughter has math phobia. And even though she completely aced her logic class in college, which is one of the hardest classes on campus, she said, and but she doesn't see that as math. And people have this math phobia. So I wanted to make sure that any math symbols I use, I completely explain. I assume you don't know what a stack is. I assume you've never thought about binary numbers. So when I talk about these things and they're just brief, I actually spend time explaining to you how a stack works. I'm not just going to assume you know it. I assume you don't know. You know programming. So you asked me earlier, who is it for? I imagine this fictitious programmer who's been in the industry for 2 years and has done some real work, and they want to learn about functional programming. That's it. That's no more than that. Now, I also say in the intro that doesn't mean students can't learn from this book. I mean, it's just a shortcoming of my imagination, right? That it's hard for me to go back to that person because it's been so many years since I've been there. But I have an experience with people who are, just starting off in their career, but working in this business for a little bit. So it's just my lack of imagination, not yours. And so that I think students could learn from this as well. I almost wish I'd have started here learning programming because, I spent so many years struggling with inferior technology for writing code.
Actually, speaking of technology for writing, the third time's the charm. No, that's not the right phrase, but quite the opposite. You've given me a third awesome segue, which is
okay.
When we talk about what we say for the end of the interview is talking about the technical tools that you use for writing and your process and things like that. And a lot of Leanpub authors are people who are writing programming books and things like that. So they actually really like to hear from other people what their process was. And so you used our bring your own book writing mode, which is where you just use your own tools, the ones you love or the ones you hate the least, and you're best at to write your book, and then you upload the file when you're ready. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what actual app or tools you used to write the book.
Okay, so I used VS Code as my editor. I used ASCII doc as the format. And I basically, when I decided to write the book, I spent a month just getting the tools figured out. Like, what tools did I want to do? What was my workflow? How do I build the book? For me, if you look at the book, it is a lot of pages, but I wanted the font to be big, right? Tiny font gets tiring. And if you're trying to understand something, the last thing you need is to struggle with a small font. So I wanted the font to be big. I wanted it to be somewhat colorful. It was aesthetics. The page had to have an aesthetic to me. And so I spent about a month trying to tweak ASCII doc with styling and other things to get it just right. But the number one thing about ASCII doc that is blows Markdown out of the water is call outs. You can have, and I have them all throughout the book. When I add code to as we're coding line by line. As I add code, I'll put call outs to the lines of code that have certain, I want to point out. And then underneath it, it's like a local footnote, if you will, these little call outs. So a call is just a little circle, color circle with a number in it, where the code is, and then right below the code you'll see so it'll be like number 1 and number 2 will be in the code, and then 1 and 2 are like footnotes right below the code, and you can read things. And there's things about that line of code I want to talk about. Many times it's just like, oh, I just added this import to import this, or I added this to bring in the data constructors, or just little notes like that. Oh, okay. And being able to have those call outs, it was amazing. I've never seen that I've never seen it in a book, but it's really hard when you're trying to describe something that you can't point to, and the calls let you point to the very thing you're trying to describe without having to repeat that thing. So I thought that one hands down for me, and so yeah, that was the tech.
And when you're working with a book that size, or when it gets to that size, I'm presumably, since the aesthetic and things were important to you, you were exporting versions of the PDF probably relatively frequently?
No, I just checked it into GitLab.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just used the free GitLab account, and I just push it via Git, just the same way I write code, right? I mean, most people do this today. They just check it into source control, and that's what I did, because they're just text files.
And did you set certain times of day that you then maybe communicated with your family about, like it's going to be like from 9 to 10 every night, I'm going to be working on my book or anything like that?
No, no. I, so many times it would be early in the morning. I come downstairs. I would write, and usually I cook bacon in the oven, and I would write, or I would write. I just lock myself in my office, and I would write there. It was just a constant, always trying to get time to write. And like I said, towards the end, became really, really difficult because you're fatigued, right? I'd really laid out the curriculum for people I was teaching at work the first year, and then when I decided to turn it into a book, I had that curriculum, but it was just okay, right? The book is far, far better. So I had a bunch of slides I was teaching people at work with, and as my writing surpassed my slides, I threw my slides away, and I just said, we're going to work right out of the book, and because it was so much better. And so it was just constantly writing as much as I could. I'm pretty disciplined, so that helps. I mean, honestly, discipline in my mind is if you want to be successful at anything, and I don't mean financially successful, I mean, you've accomplished something that you value, you've produced something of value, something you value, and hopefully others do. Discipline is it. Everything starts with discipline. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a life. It doesn't mean that, that you have to give up everything. I'm not into this grind culture kind of way of thinking. I was when I was younger and before it was even called that. And it's a mistake. You really burn out. I worked 20 hours on and 10 hours off with no time off when I was working in animation for months with 0 days off. Just the wrong approach. But being disciplined enough such that it becomes something you do when you have the time, that's the trick. And if you're just consistent, don't worry about the deadline. Just keep doing it.
And what was the reason you chose to self-publish the book, and why did you choose LeanPub as at least one of the platforms you're going to be selling it on?
You're actually the only platform I'm planning on selling it on. I bought books from you guys, and I liked that you could have a slider, right? And people who couldn't afford it could slide the price down. I thought that was really great. I wanted this book to be available. I mean, we're lucky we grew up in this country. We were born in this country, and I knew there were people, like in India who would love this, and maybe they couldn't afford the normal price. And I thought, I mean, to me, I would have paid $150 for this book 5 years ago. So if I went back in time and gave myself this book and I said it cost you $150, I would have bought this book because it would have saved me so much pain. So the book is highly valuable to me, the poor slob who had to write it, right? But and it may be highly valuable to others, but they don't have the means. So I thought that was really cool. So I could allow people to slide it down. You can give coupons. I thought that was really great. I didn't know that until I self-published. I just had bought books from you guys, and I liked the way you did things. It wasn't until I actually put my own book up that I realized, wow, there is so much that, like, everything I could think of that I might want to do or it's like there. And now when you're just a buyer of a book, you don't have any idea. But I was really impressed with, like, oh, I want to give somebody a coupon. Oh, that exists. You have that. Oh, I'd like to know this information. Oh, boom, it's there. Oh, I'd like to be able to update everything seems to be there. Everything I've looked for so far is just there. So so the post experience was surprising. The level of quality of the website and the services that are there for you as an author, I think are great.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for that. I can say the credit for all those awesome features goes to LeanPub authors themselves. LeanPub, much of what's there is there because of us, talking with authors over the years and them running into walls and saying, how can we break this one down? And, running into rivers and saying, how can we build a bridge over it? And things like whatever analogy you want to use. But a lot of those things are there because an author's like, hey, what would be really great? would be this. And actually, the last question I always ask on this podcast, if the guest has published a book on LeanPub, is if there was one thing that you encountered that really bugged you on LeanPub, or if there was one magic feature we could build for you, is there anything you can think of that you would ask us to do?
I mean, I would say not really. I can nitpick things like when I had to put the table of contents up, there was that you guys really, I really appreciate it too. You have this big paragraph that explains everything, and it's just not good and not. I don't have enough control over the formatting of the table of contents. I think maybe a PDF I could have just pulled out of the book, and if I could upload a PDF, and then you could just see that instead of me having to do HTML, and then you guys filter the HTML so that we don't have any garbage tags in there, or try to put some script things in there. That filtering mucks with your formatting. So if I could just take a PDF and do my table of contents and then upload that, and you could just display the PDF or something like that. I think that was the one little thing that I encountered. Everything else so far has been pretty stellar.
Yeah, that's super interesting. If I can just explain that. So, OG LeanPub has various writing modes where you write in our plain text markup, which is a variant of Markdown called Markua. And when you when you write in plain text and you click a button to publish a version or preview a version or something, and then what we can do is we automatically generate the table of contents in your book, but we can also automatically generate a table of contents on your book's web page on LeanPub where you're trying to sell it to people.
Right.
And having the table of contents there is very helpful. So when we later created the bring your own book format, which is like, why are we telling all authors you can't use LeanPub unless you use our workflow? Let's have something so they can use their own workflow and then still take advantage of all the other features that we offer. But that left us with this dilemma, right? Because we can't auto-generate the table of contents. So what are we going to do? And we did two very LeanPub-y things, and that's not a self-congratulatory thing that I'm saying. One was the wall of text, as we call it, which is a very long explanations that if you hunt around on LeanPub as an author, you'll find these in various places. But what we did was we said, okay, well, let's give people the ability to just write their table of contents for their web page on LeanPub in HTML. And your suggestion that we actually just give people the opportunity we've already given them the opportunity in that writing mode to upload a whole book and a sample book and a cover image. So why not also give them the ability to upload an image or a PDF or what have you of the table of contents and display that instead? I mean, I can't make any guarantees that we're going to do it, but like that's actually a really excellent suggestion and would solve the problem, especially for people who are like, even you're highly technical and like there's things I can't do, for people who are like, you'll see in the wording where it's like, if you don't know what HTML is, you can just ignore this, but that means you can't put up your table of contents unless you do it in the about the book section or some other workaround. So being able to use an image there is actually a really good idea, and I'll make sure to share that.
Okay. There's one other thing now but not something I've experienced, but you have your own Markdown language, right? You should look at the call outs for, since you have a lot of technical books and you probably have a lot of authors who are doing code, right? I can't tell you how that is the number one reason I used ASCII Doc. It was a pain, honestly. I put up with all of its warts just to get that one feature, and it's an incredible feature. So the call outs, like I said, if you could add that to your Markdown, I might have thought to use the LeanPub approach.
Okay, well, I'll definitely note that to the team too, and I'll I can share a screenshot from your book showing exactly exactly what you're talking about.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful feature. It is really an amazing feature. I mean, it does some other nicety. It has some other niceties, but it was the winning feature for if you're writing a book as a programmer and you want to talk about code line by line, or or multiple lines of a block of code, it's amazing. So that would be cool, since you're asking.
Yeah, well, Charles, thank you very much for sharing your story and your approach to teaching and your approach to writing and everything else about that. And for anyone listening, the book is Functional Programming Made Easier: A Step-by-Step Guide. If you think it's right for you, please go check it out. It's a really great book, and it really does deliver on the principles that Charles tried to implement when he wrote it and produced it. So thanks very much for being on the Front Matter podcast.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thanks. And as always, thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the Front Matter podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate and review it wherever you found it. And if you'd like to be a Lean Pub author yourself, please check out our website at leanpub.com. Thanks.